lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring.
3 years ago, we didn't know what was coming. If we had, we probably wouldn't have done this. While learning the law, we got a front row seat to some of the most important and historic events this country has ever faced. We saw the power, the successes, and the failures of law right up close. We studied public health and the law during a once-in-a-century pandemic that took the lives of over 500,000 Americans. We worked at Temple Law clinics during an eviction crisis. We studied constitutional law and federal courts during 2 contentious Supreme Court nominations, 2 impeachment hearings, and the death of the notorious RBG, an icon who seemed immortal. We studied immigration law while children were kept in cages at the border. They still are. We studied criminal law and criminal procedure during a racial reckoning implicating our criminal justice system, with the Black Lives Matter protests happening just outside our campus, culminating in a movement that many have called the new civil rights movement. We studied race and the law during unprecedented violence against Asian Americans. Each of us experienced these moments in profoundly personal ways. Some of you lost family members to COVID, friends. For Black students, George Floyd's murder and the BLM movement hit home in ways that none of us could ever begin to imagine. Asian students, like myself, had to attend class the same day of the Georgia shootings, wondering how we were going to focus when our very existence as Asian women was under attack. But as the great civil rights leader John Lewis once said, we may not have chosen the time, but the time has chosen us. We did what Temple taught us how to do. We persevered by the skin of our teeth, no matter what it took. We kept going, and we made it. All of you sitting here today, you made it.
I am very satisfied to welcome in a name who I'm sure you will hear from in the future. She is a powerhouse. She's the Director of Community Engagement for Pennsylvania State Senator Amanda Cappelletti. Okay, and ladies and gentlemen, Danielle Powerhouse Phillips. So glad you're here with me.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
So I saw the you went to law school, and I wanted to ask you what compelled you to go to law school?
So I have a pretty long story, but it's elevator pitch that I've perfected now. So I went to law school as a 37-year-old mother of 2. My kids, I just graduated, so my kids are now 12 and 7. So what ended up happening was I grew up in a town called Madera, California, and now that is very near Fresno, California.
Right.
And growing up in the 90s, I was in a failing school, which was in every way the school to prison pipeline. At the time, I didn't know that because that was the only thing that I had ever really known. But it was a failing school under Title I standards, which the Bush administration, would later call failing school. It was 85% Mexican. So my mother is Mexican and my dad is Chinese. So it was a majority minority school. It was during the 90s where we were dealing with, the super predator myths, gang violence, all of these things. My high school had sort of a gang deterrence unit with real cops on it. For little fights, people would be getting pepper sprayed, hogtied, taken away to jail. At the same time, that kind of policing was happening in the community. But one of the biggest employers was the largest women's state prison in the country. And so it became this bizarre dynamic where you had, the population being heavily policed, but also people wanting to work in corrections, because often they're buried in these sort of low-income rural areas. So that was the dynamic of how I kind of grew up. And I think it always stuck with me. My dad was a teacher at that prison for 25 years. And in many ways, it ruined his life and really crushed his spirit. And so that was a backdrop to how I grew up. And of course, you see things and they seem wrong, but I just didn't know any different. So I went to the local college, Cal State Fresno, and I got a major in English. And then I decided to move to Boston to get a master's in library science, because at that time, I really wasn't interested in law. To be very frank, I didn't think I was smart enough. And I had teachers, people who went to failing schools will understand having teachers who kind of, in many ways, make you think like you're not smart enough if they don't just tell you outright that you aren't. So I didn't think I was smart enough to do it, honestly. So I found out that being a librarian was a real career that needed a master's degree. So I did that. And that's where I met my husband. And I just started thinking a lot about, I ended up reading a book about 10 years ago. And I just started thinking a lot about my childhood, and it was about criminal justice. And it was about the difference between how we prosecute white collar crimes versus, regular street crime. And it brought into it race and everything. And it just really hit home for me. It was like suddenly all the things that I experienced growing up and being in the school to prison pipeline, seeing people who I knew in jail and prison and in this endless cycle, it really brought all that out. And then I decided that is what I wanted to do. And so I enrolled in law school as a 37-year-old mother.
Wow. And you kind of, once you got to school and you stepped forward to be, the candidate for class speaker.
Yes.
What made you do that?
So I was on the Temple National Trial Team, which is a competitive team that you have to try out for when you're in law school. Temple's now ranked #1 in trial advocacy in the country. So I had been doing a lot of public speaking, but I also do a lot of activism in the community, speaking at rallies. And there was just a lot of things that I wanted to say to our graduating class that I didn't think anyone else would say. I wanted to talk about COVID. I wanted to talk about police brutality. I wanted to talk about Black Lives Matter and the Asian movement and the Asian violence. And I just really didn't think that anybody else would be willing to do that. And so that's why I ran.
Wow. Okay. Because in your speech, you said this:
Be the lawyer who collaborates, the lawyer who gives someone the benefit of the doubt, the lawyer who offers someone free advice, not thinking of what's in it for you, the lawyer who sits with someone on their darkest day and just listens.
When I heard that, I said, why did you want to put that in your speech?
Because I think a lot of times lawyers don't do any of those things. And I think that they are stereotypically known in this country for not doing those things. And I've seen them not do those things. I've seen lawyers talk to people who are having terrible days, being sentenced for murder, on trial for, aggravated assault, various things. And they're not taking the time to simply explain to them simply what's happening to them. They're not taking the time to listen or to think that, maybe this person, my client, actually has some interesting things to say in their own defense. It's just this very old school notion that we're the lawyers, we know, we're going to make these decisions for you, and That's that. And so law school does not teach you how to be an empathetic person or a compassionate person, period. It doesn't. And that there's something very wrong with that.
Wow. Right now you are located in Philly, right? Philadelphia or Pennsylvania?
Yeah, so I live in Montgomery County, which is just sort of the first county outside of Philly.
Obviously, you know, in the 28th district, Larry Krasner just won his primary, and he's just about famous at this point. He's gotten so many things done out there. Um, Now, in light of that, if you could take a swipe, right, at the criminal justice system, or if you could do one thing from a lawyer standpoint, let's say from a prosecutor standpoint, or from a defendant lawyer standpoint, if you had one thing that you can change or regulate in the criminal justice system, what would that be?
So one of the things, I mean, the problem is so huge that it is nearly impossible to find one thing. But one thing that is desperately needed in Pennsylvania is state funding and a state system for public defense services. So Pennsylvania is only one of 2 states that does not do that. So when the decision came down from the Supreme Court, Gideon v. Wainwright, that said that every core defendant who is facing prosecution by the government and their liberty is at risk gets a free lawyer, the Supreme Court didn't tell the states how to actually do it. So every state decided to fund these services differently. Pennsylvania does it at the county levels. And so what has happened is there's no uniformity. The amount of money spent is wildly different. The caseloads are wildly different. You have some counties in Pennsylvania where one public defender might have 300 cases. And then another county where a public defender might have a 50-person caseload. They never get enough funding, but there are no standards. So what needs to happen in Pennsylvania is there needs to actually be state funding that goes to public defense offices. And there need to be standards implemented and ethical practices, because the criminal justice system targets poor people and Black and brown people. And they're often the same. And that's not disputed. Every single statistic shows that. That's like gravity. And there's nobody on this earth that can argue that that is not the case. And so the fact is that almost most of them are going to use a public defender. And if that public defender is not competent, is not funded, there's no oversight, then that person is going to lose. And the chance to reverse a decision on appeal is like 0.1%. Once you're in and you lose, that's it. You're not getting out. You're not getting out until you do your sentence or, whatever happens. So that first lawyer is incredibly important. And we can't have that in Pennsylvania until there's a statewide system.
What about would you, if you could change the system somewhat, if you will, would you be interested in changing it with regulation regarding a prosecuting lawyer?
What do you mean by that?
In other words, like from what I hear, I'm not a lawyer, but from what I hear and understand, that prosecuting lawyers somewhat have the show. They pretty much run things, and it's up to the defendant lawyer to basically block it out, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In so many cases, like Larry Krasner, he or not even just him. There's other lawyers that have prosecuted people, understanding that that person may have evidence that could overturn the case. Would you be interested in regulation? And I don't know if that's the proper word as far as the law is concerned, but is there a way to better regulate, if you will, prosecuting lawyers?
No, I think that's a great question. And yeah, I mean, any prosecutor who has evidence that someone could be innocent under law has to turn that over to the defense attorney. But it's this weird thing where it's all based on trusting them, because you don't know what you don't know, right? So who's to know if they have it and they're just not giving it? And so absolutely, sanctions need to be harsher for that. If someone is caught doing that, they need to be disbarred. I mean, that's an extreme ethical violation. I also think that, right now, like what Larry Krasner has done is he's exercised discretion that prosecutors have. So it's not as if a law came in Pennsylvania saying marijuana should be decriminalized. But as the prosecutor, he could just say to all of the lawyers in his office, we're not going to charge marijuana, which he's done to some extent, although there's people who say it's still happening. But so you don't need to change the law if he's going to implement certain policies. But what happens when he leaves?
Right. Right.
What happens if he would have lost? What happens if he loses next time? You haven't changed the law. You've just changed the policies, and it's nothing stopping the next guy or woman from saying, forget that, we're going to follow state law and we're going to prosecute marijuana. But yes, my opinion on prosecutors who do not turn over that kind of material is absolutely they should be disbarred.
One of the things that you had said, you said that you had a love for libraries. As a matter of fact, it was up on your page, and I saw you, give recognition for, I think it was Library Week or Day or something to that effect. Again, can you just tell the viewers the background of you being a librarian? Because go ahead.
Yeah, so I actually didn't realize, and most people don't realize, that it's like a professional job that requires a master's degree, but it does require a master's degree in library and information science. And really, you're like the manager of the library. And so you could either be in a K through 12 school library, a university library, or a public library. There's also specialty libraries. So to be a law librarian, you would have to have a master's in library science and a JD, a law degree. To be a medical librarian, you may need some kind of medical training and a master's in library science. So when I was a kid, I would always go to the public library. I just have my parents drop me off there, and I would just kind of walk around and look at magazines and read, and I just really enjoyed it. And so when I graduated from undergrad and I had an English degree, I had no clue what I was going to do. So I actually had a boyfriend at that time that was moving to Boston, and he's like, come with me. And I said, I'm not going with you unless I have something to do. So I was going to enroll in like master's in English programs. I had no idea. So then I stumbled on this degree, and I just thought, wow, I've always loved libraries. I had a fascination with them. I'll apply here, and I got in. So I did it. But for me, libraries are the greatest democratic equalizer we have, because anybody can go there. It's free information. Now it's free access to internet. There are people in society who wouldn't have access to internet without libraries. There are librarians who have taught, people who've never seen a computer, and I've done it myself, how to use a mouse, how to, we don't think about all of the older folks when all of this technology came, who was helping them. And it was librarians. And when I worked in libraries, it was like being a social worker in many ways. I helped people print out legal paperwork. I helped them get their driver's license. I helped them, like I said, learn computers. Like you do so many it's like social work. And so that, really is what I loved the most about being a librarian.
According to Forbes.com, U.S. public schools have lost nearly 20% of their librarians since 2000. Question, is Google a threat to libraries?
Absolutely not. So I worked at a for-profit college. Have you heard of DeVry?
Yes.
Yeah. So it was that group of colleges. And I used to do a presentation to the faculty and the deans. And it was saying that librarians are not competing with Google. All we're doing is translating our skills to the internet. The internet is nothing more than a gigantic card catalog.
Right. Right.
But it is, that's what it is.
Right.
And so there isn't a person whose job it is to help people sort through this card catalog. And so my argument is that should be the librarian's function.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you think teachers and school board members, um, do you think that they need to find a better way to get students interested or active in libraries more?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a struggle because when you're a librarian at a school, you tend to like kind of be considered separate from like the teachers and the faculty if you're in a university. And really, they should be considered as teachers themselves. And so that's always a struggle for librarians where they kind of feel like no one is thinking about us. But in some senses, it's librarians' fault because honestly, it is a profession mostly of older people and retired people, or people who may have been stay-at-home moms who went for like a second career, and they tend to not love change, and they tend to not be. One of the reasons I'm not one anymore is because I'm like really loud, and that doesn't fit with being a librarian. They're not like chatty, outgoing people most of the time. And so it's very painful for them to be in the business of marketing themselves and pushing themselves and pushing their services. So while often they're not included when they think about teachers and open houses and being part of the curriculum, it's kind of like because they themselves don't push, because that's just kind of not their role. But absolutely, like it needs to be part of a school curriculum. And it's not just the Dewey Decimal System. Here's how you find a book. It should be teaching information. So, telling a kid, what is Wikipedia? How does that information get there? Is it trustworthy? Because back in my day, when I first went to library school, I graduated in 2006, it was a huge no-no to use Wikipedia. And now all these kids out here use it as if it's a real source.
Right. Now, there's been a lot of politics around school boards now. Out of nowhere, you hear a lot of people running for school board, and it's like, wow, like
No, that's definitely happening in Pennsylvania for sure.
I believe that's happening in a lot of states, and I think it's something to look at. Do you think school board should look like the community that it's in?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, that's the same for any organization. I mean, you should always strive to represent the community in terms of racial. My big thing is I do a lot of anti-racist work. I'm half Mexican and half Chinese, so race is always kind of dominated in my life, is something I just always think about. But any kind of board absolutely needs to mirror the community. I think that I don't know why so many people have jumped on these school board races. I think the COVID closures had a lot of parents up in arms either way, either stay closed for safety or reopen because we like don't believe in COVID or whatever. So I don't know if that's what pushed so many people to become interested in this, but it's happened in Pennsylvania. There was a woman in Boyertown, a 21-year-old girl who just won her primary for Boyertown School Board, and all these posts have come out about her saying like really racist stuff. Like one of them saying that the N-word isn't that bad, and if anybody's offended by it, it's their own fault. And so now there's this, oh yeah, people are up in arms about it, and as well they should be. And so there's just been really a lot of contentious school board races for some reason.
Right. And I think that's going on all across the country. And I think I don't remember, being an observer of politics for this long. I don't remember so much energy around the school board situation. Now, with Trump's election, obviously there's a lot of emotion, and I actually looked up critical race theory, and I just wanted my viewers to understand. I'm going to put this up on the screen. Derek Albert Bell Jr. was an American lawyer, professor, and civil rights activist. In 1971, he became the first tenured African American professor of law at Harvard Law School, and he is often credited as one of the organizers of critical race theory. I should point out that Derek Albert Bell Jr. Was born November 5th, 1830, and passed away October 5th, 2011. And first of all, that phrase, critical race theory, it's like throwing a bomb in the middle of our politics after the last 4 years. And it seems as if people on the right, and it seems as if people on the right kind of keep on talking about this issue. Now I thought a lot about this, and I said, when you go to different countries that have different politics, they have dictatorships and things of that nature, they always teach their students what they want them to be taught. They'll say different great things about the country, and but I also thought about this country, and I thought about why there's some inconsistencies, to put it lightly, in our history, and I feel like we are a people of many different backgrounds. For our children to be studying things that are not true basically flies in the face of what this country represents. What do you think about that?
No, that's 100% right. I mean, we do not learn we don't even learn 10%, I think, of the struggles and the history of racism in this country and how it's infected every institution and every part of it. So much so that Howard Zinn wrote The People's History of the United States of America, which is, a book that is taught in colleges, but you have to wait till you get to college. That really does focus on some of the, the genocide of Native Americans, slavery, things like that. But it is just outstanding that you'll meet adults who will say things like, well, I didn't think slavery was that bad. I mean, they took care of them and they seem to be like a happy family. And then you get these movies that come out, 12 Years a Slave, and people will watch them because they're critically acclaimed and they'll go, well, that's not what I learned. I don't really think it didn't seem that bad. How come I didn't learn this? And so public school curriculum, I have never been a teacher. My husband is in education. I don't know how that's necessarily decided, if it's decided by like the state or whoever. They have certain standards of what they want to teach, but absolutely we hide the ball. As an example, when the Asian stuff started happening, the violence against Asian Americans, and there were all these vigils and people interested in it, and the Georgia shootings, suddenly, the Chinese Exclusion Act, everyone started talking about that. And most people had never heard of it. I didn't study Japanese internment camps until a law school case. And there was a Japanese internment camp in Fresno, California, which is 20 minutes north of my hometown.
Yeah.
And no one, K through 12, even undergrad, Cal State Fresno, no one taught me that.
Yeah, because when I was in school, I remember reading a textbook. About somebody being an African American. I'm sorry, the name escapes me right. No, Nelson Mandela. So much information out here. Nelson Mandela was a rebel who was trying to overthrow his government. And one of the reasons why I specifically remember that is because I was chose to read it. And I'm thinking, in my house, Nelson Mandela was a good man. And I'm reading this textbook and it's saying Nelson Mandela was a rebel and deserved prison because he was trying to overthrow his government. And I just also want my viewers to understand that at the local level, where at school board levels, is where they get to decide the curriculum. They get to vote on what kids should be learning. And so that I just wanted to throw that in there, and so people can understand the energy now. And again, this was drummed up by the right. You know, this thing, they kept on, because honestly, I don't remember. I'm not going to say I'm fairly astute in Democratic politics. You know, I don't necessarily see that being put out there the way it's being put out.
I think it's the reaction to the right was they didn't want critical race theory taught. They don't want things about slavery or, you know, all of the various, you know, Native Americans and all these things put out there, because I think, you know, obviously this is a white supremacist narrative that's being peddled.
Right.
And if you start telling people the truth, how are people going to react?
Right. Right.
You know, and they're going to suddenly say, wait a minute, you know, this is not a country that I trust necessarily. This is not, you know, look at all these problems. For me, knowing the truth is powerful and necessary to make change. I love my country. I lived in London for 5 years, and this was during the Trump election. And I decided to give all of that up. It was a great life, and come back here because I love my country. But if you don't know the truth, it's not going to get any better.
That's right. And it you know, it should be, to me, you know, again, I'm not calling on the federal government exactly to get into this. I mean, although it seems like the federal government, that's the only agency that's actually doing something right now, because at local levels and state levels, they don't want to move at all. I mean, even when it comes to federal investigations of police departments, you know, nobody wants to investigate. Nobody wants to dig in the weeds of this stuff. And because I think people are kind of nervous of what they may find. But the truth that needs to come out.
Yeah, I mean, and there's just so much to talk about in terms of our history. Like, you know, some independent people, just regular authors, have put out books that are very powerful. Then one of the newest one was Caste, where she compares our racial system to the caste system in India and says that we're just the same. We think that we don't have a caste, but we absolutely do have a racial caste system. And then there was a book called The Sum of Us, I think, where she basically said all of these efforts, these racist efforts, have only resulted in hurting everyone, including white Americans.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, she gives this really interesting example of, in the 1950s and 60s, there were these beautiful public pools in cities. And as soon as they wanted to integrate them and let non-white people use them, the cities drained them. So then everybody lost.
You know, and it made me think about the phrase "the big lie," right? And you know, the big lie is actually, it seems as if it's actually larger than what maybe perhaps we originally thought it was. We were talking about, you know, the Trump presidency, but when you think about what Trump represented, you know, and the history that's not out there, that our kids aren't learning, and it turns them into ignorant adults, and then you have a situation where you basically not only lied to African Americans, to minorities across the United States and a lot of other places, but you have lied to white people and told white people things that, hey, look, this isn't true. You know, so they're out there, you know, perhaps some of them are carrying on in ways that maybe they'll reflect on later and say, hey, maybe that wasn't a good idea. I look terrible.
But, yeah, I mean, what Trump represents and is representing is a government that is run by fully fully embracing and being loud about having white supremacist goals. I mean, that they are elevating white people and they want to keep their position no matter what. And unlike other administrations, he's just been very explicit about it. And his followers have been very explicit about it. I mean, it's always been there. And frankly, it is the status quo. To do nothing is the status quo and keeps white supremacy in place 100%. But he kind of built his brand by being loud and intentional about it. And you got people who were feeling like, oh, suddenly we're kind of losing this position because look at all these minorities that are able to, we had a minority be president. We're going to have a minority be vice president. They're taking power. They're taking something from us. But, it's not pie. And like you said, attempts to block certain things. There's a lie that white people say that it is African Americans that are more on welfare than them. That's absolutely not true. Right. The largest group of welfare users are white, poor Americans.
Right.
But every time it comes up for, like, say, a vote or it's a policy, white Americans believe that it's minorities, and so they'll vote it down, not realizing who they're really hurting, which is other white people.
Talk a little bit about when Trump was president, when he first started talking about basically, in so many words, talking about Asian people. I mean, that's basically what he was doing. Speak to that. Speak to how it made you feel. Speak to how it made people around you feel, and speak to what are you doing about it.
Yeah. So my father's Chinese. My mother's Mexican. Trump, saying the thing about the Kung flu and China virus, he did it in conjunction also with talking about Mexicans. When he remember early in his campaigning, when he said that all Mexicans were rapists and that they were coming over the border because they were not like the good ones. So he was able to insult both my people, all during his presidency. What we saw, particularly with Asians, was a very real result, which was like extreme violence. I mean, there was a 1900% increase in violence against Asian Americans. I mean, and people have asked me, well, really, can you connect him calling it the Kung flu to that? And I don't think it's a coincidence, and it's the same thing that happens to minority groups all the time. It's like you have to dehumanize someone and so that they can be treated in a different way. And so saying you brought in the virus, it's dirty. Oh, Asian people eat bats. We've always been accused of eating dog, which is, I'm like 5th generation. So I don't, I'm just basically American at this point. So, the effect on me was the most hurtful thing was that people who claim to be your friends and even your relatives who supported that and didn't see anything wrong with it. And there was a quote that said, the most dangerous thing about Trump was what he exposed in other people. And that, what I think was the most upsetting part, where there were people who didn't think that your humanity was deserving of being treated with respect by the person in the highest office in government in this country, and that they were willing to vote for that and not think twice. That, I think, is what hurt the most.
There was a lot of people who said the same thing regarding, and I think friends that are silent when these type of things happen. I mean, people know where I stand on these things, but it's so disappointing, because in a way that's an assist to this man's evil words and intentions. And he got, and he also got, how many votes was it? 70 something million votes?
That was also extremely difficult to deal with. I saw his first, in 2016, I lived in London. So I was watching what was happening here in another country. And I didn't know. It was like I left the US in 2000. I lived there from 2013 to 2018. And it was like, I didn't know what happened. It was as if overnight everyone just flipped and the country went crazy. And I just could not believe that this was happening. And I remember telling coworkers who were British, like, don't worry, he's not going to win. Americans are not like this. We reject this kind of thing. And to my shock and horror, when he won, and then to see it a second time, the victory felt hollow because so many people still voted for that you could dehumanize, African Americans, Asian people, Mexican people, women. The amount of dehumanizing he did of women, white women, and the number of them who voted for him, it was just absolutely shocking. And to me, it was so clear that they were choosing white dominance and white supremacy because that is the only thing that he was selling. He didn't have any policies. He didn't have any social things that he implemented. A lot of people tried to say that the economy was his doing, but the economy had tanked by that point. I mean, his actions and inactions around COVID probably directly led to the death of hundreds of thousands of people. And so to see all of that and still embrace that showed me how strong white dominance and white supremacy is.
And also the man was, the man was stupid. I mean,
he wasn't charismatic. He was not a good speaker. He was not intelligent.
None of that.
All he was offering was white dominance. That is it. You could not point to anything else. And so people who tried to say these other things, it was just a ruse. Just admit that that you are choosing racism. Admit that.
When he won the 4 years ago when he beat Hillary, and I had people around me that night. I was thinking Hillary was gonna win this, and let's take it home. And I had to send everybody home early. I literally, because I knew the type of impact. I mean, we're talking about domestic issues here, but the foreign policy issues that was going on when he was president was outrageous. The things that, they always say you gotta, American people, they elect Republicans in the times of good times, but whenever they need something, cleaned up, they'll elect a Democrat. And that night, I told somebody, it's going to be a show. It is going to be hell. And I get criticized sometimes for bringing up Trump, and because I know the power that he had and the things that he destroyed. I just feel like thank God Biden is in there right now. And
I mean, there were legitimate criticisms of Biden. I know that he had a hand in the 1994 crime bill, but the fact is that he knows how government works.
Right.
He's been in those positions. He knows how to make the deals. He knows how to get legislation pushed through. And he was the calming kind of presence that we needed. The idea that somebody has never served a day in government could be president is insulting. It's insulting to all of us who work in government. And I very much say I work in government, not politics, because I am on the official government side, nonpartisan. And to have someone who's never worked a day doing that, to think that they could then sort of lead and be in the highest office is just, it's megalomaniacal, it's insane. And then the fact that people liked it, it was, and like I said, I think that all of that, it was so unreasonable because it was based on wanting racism. But because they didn't want to admit it, his supporters won't admit it, they make all kinds of confusing, illogical arguments. And you can show them the facts and they'll still deny it because they're choosing racism. They just don't want to admit it.
Right. Right now we have a decision coming up. The Supreme Court is going to take on the case of Roe v. Wade. Are they going to hear it? I believe, to be technical about it. And so the what he did to the Supreme Court to put all of those right wing, I'm not talking about right wing judge. I'm talking about far to the right. I mean extremists that he has on.
It's extremely bad. And what people don't realize is that there has already been a very important decision, like in some senses overturned by that Supreme Court. It happened about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and the news really didn't really didn't catch on to it. But it was Jones v. Mississippi, and it was saying that, so a few years back, maybe like 2012, there are a bunch of cases that came down that said you can't automatically sentence a juvenile to life in prison without a separate finding that they're irredeemable. And so all of these lifers were resentenced in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania had the most people serving life without parole when they were convicted as juveniles. And a bunch of people got released because of it. Just a few weeks ago, the Supreme Court basically overturned it. And they now said you don't need a separate finding of incorrigibility. You can just send a juvenile to serve life in prison. I mean, it was a huge decision that it really didn't get any attention, and I don't know why. But We're already starting to see the effects of this court.
Right. I saw some of your activist videos, and it was a pleasure to watch those. I felt like you were you're very. I actually got a chance to see. I think you did a video where it was just you in the camera, and you got a chance to speak to a local issue in PA, I believe it was, and your words were very direct. And I don't know if that has anything to do with experience being a community engagement office that you have. Or that you do.
So I actually met the senator through community organizing. So I have a group called PA Women Rise, and over the summer.
So that's your group.
That's my group. Yes.
That's impressive.
Yes, PA Women Rise is my group, along with 3 other women, and so we were doing some racial justice protesting over the summer, and I had met the senator. Well, she had won the primary at that point through that organizing. And so she, we got to know each other, and she's a Temple Law alum. I just graduated Temple Law, and we, were having coffee, and I basically, just said, hey, you just won, who are you looking to hire? Will you hire me? And she said, yes. And she said, I want you to be the director of community engagement. So what most people don't realize is if your state rep or state senator is doing their job well, they will absolutely have an outreach person on staff whose job it is to go out to the constituents and to the community and show up to events, meet with folks, understand what the problems are so that we can help people, but also inform legislation. Because you cannot go around making laws and amending laws if you don't know what the people in your community actually care about.
Right.
So I think that's something most people don't realize, that their state rep and state senator absolutely should be doing and needs to be doing.
So that means you're basically out and about. You're not in the office.
All the time. So I meet with police, firemen, schools, superintendents, advocacy groups, grassroots organizations. We go to we just painted a big Black Lives Matter mural outside of Norristown Courthouse, which was a community project that we all went to. We do food drives. We just held a job fair for our community. And so your state senator and state reps absolutely need to be doing all of those things. And if they're not, then they're not doing their jobs properly.
Well, so basically you were kind of like, and not only that, you were forward about, so you knew exactly what you wanted to do. I mean, it's not often that you see a state senator and you're like, hey, look, this is what I want to do. Like,
No, so my work, honestly, I had never known about that whole, and to be frank, it's an industry. Like it's an industry, just like any other industry. And so I really had never, I mean, I was kind of interested in politics in terms of criminal justice stuff, but that really, it was my whole bag was criminal justice stuff. I had been involved in some activist groups in Philly, some of the groups that had worked to elect Larry Krasner, but it was more just the activist side of it. So then when my group started, there was a woman in my group at that time who really was big on reaching out to elected officials. We'd have events and she'd invite the state rep and she'd invite the state senator. And it was all new to me of what they even do, who they are, so in these circles is how we like kind of met. And so that's very much how people get these jobs is it's all, and it's very bad. And it ends up edging a lot of minorities out, especially because it's just like running in these circles where you meet people. That's all how it happens. Like there's not even real like job postings to work at the state senate, at state representative. It's like so-and-so knows so-and-so who knows so-and-so and they recommend you. And it can be very like cronyistic.
so if somebody wants to do the kind of work you do, how, what can you tell them? What kind of advice?
So one thing that I would definitely recommend is trying to intern, especially like for a high school, college student. If you just email your state rep or your state senator and say, I would like to intern, would you consider me? That's definitely a foot in the door. It's easier to go to your actual state senator or state rep because they want to make their constituents happy, because in the back of their mind, it's always like, I want to get reelected, right? So you want to make those voters happy. Right. So you go to your people and say, hey, I'm interested in interning, like, how does that work? Or, LinkedIn, I've done a lot of LinkedIn networking where I just like sort of look up people on LinkedIn, like someone who has a similar job to me or works. Hey, I'd love to talk with you about your job and how somebody gets into this field. You don't need a law degree to do any of it. I mean, even to be the legislator themselves, you don't need a law degree. It's helpful. I think they like it because they think you understand the process, but it's definitely not necessary. But just, regular networking is helpful. I'm happy to give my email to anybody who would be interested and we could talk about it. But yeah, I mean, most people are very helpful and they want to, help a person who wants to get their foot in the door.
Where the hell do you store all that information at? I mean, you're like But real quick before we end this, just talk about your what is it? The PA Women's Rise group. Is that what it is?
Yes. So my group PA Women Rise was founded in June of 2020 with myself, Marlena Green, Heather Lewis, and Bridget Flynn. We're all women in Montgomery County. We were formed to really be sort of an anti-racist criminal justice reform organization in Montgomery County. Heather Lewis runs the bail fund in Montgomery County, and I'm a board member there. So we push a lot for criminal justice reform. It can often be a losing battle because even though Philly is very progressive, Montgomery County, that's just really right next to it, is not. And so it's a painful transition. And in a lot of ways, they're still stuck in the tough on crime 80s. And the people have kind of progressed more than the institutions and the people in power. And so it's constantly this fighting battle. Montgomery County is always being sued by the ACLU. They were just sued for not allowing the ACLU to visit people in the local jail. So it's an uphill battle. And so my group really works on bringing awareness. During COVID, we did interviews with people who were incarcerated in the county jail through their loved one. And so we could really understand what the conditions were like during COVID. And, we have some projects coming up. We were involved in a magistrate district judge race where we were really pushing a specific candidate because reform does come in electing progressives to these very, very local seats.
Absolutely. All right. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.